This is the
Five Stars
Podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Oh, what a beautiful day it is. The sun is shining, the country's in shambles. AEW Dynamite is still an abomination of a television program. All is right with the world. So on that totally upbeat note, welcome one and all to another installment of How Can Modern Professional Wrestling Get Any Worse? Well, at this stage, I don't even know how possible that is. On the one hand, you've got one major company whose top stars are either injured or inactive. And on the other hand, you've got another major company who hasn't had top stars since the birth of the Attitude Era. And Roman Reigns and Cody Rhodes, who are both out right now. We all dreaded this day would come, but lo and behold, here we are in 2022, and the realization has finally hit that modern professional wrestling is probably at its lowest point in modern recorded history, despite what the media outlets try to sell you on otherwise, with business being good. Believe me, we can talk about ratings and quarterly earnings reports and ticket sales until we're blue in the face, but when y'all are actually looking at everything on a surface level and you actually watch the television programs every single week, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that both major wrestling companies are putting out some of the worst TV programs in recent memory. And nothing can be truer when you analyze the fact that AEW's top guy right now is a gas station attendant whose biggest claim to fame is that he does death matches and makes goofy mannerisms in his matches. And with WWE, their top guy has been off of TV for something like 2 months now. And I don't even know who falls into a close second. Again, take Cody out of the equation because he's injured. Plus, you got the whole Hush Money saga with Vince McMahon. And, yeah, that's a thing at the moment. Kind of a hot button issue. But don't worry. Things are great. Just dandy. Just happy as a clam. At least we know that modern wrestling talk is kept to a bare minimum on the Friday podcast so that we can actually talk about good wrestling content when we get to the retro series portion, my favorite portion of the podcast. But before that, make sure that if you are tuning into the Five Starr Wrestling Report for the first time, that you subscribe, click the bell icon, like the show, leave a comment, and all the regular stuff that helps me out in the YouTube algorithms. You can also find us on Rumble in the link in the description. We're here on Mondays and Fridays every week for new material. Not that there's a whole lot of new material to cover when it comes to discussing Dynamite, because my God, that show. I don't even know how to be more blunt about it. It's just a bad television show. Seriously, take away your biases for liking certain guys and marking out for all the spectacular moves guys do. I'm just speaking solely on a level of marketing quality, logical, story-driven professional wrestling on a week-to-week basis. AEW's terrible at it. WWE's terrible at it too, but we're talking specifically about AEW here. There's no follow-up with anything from the previous week. Nothing is ever thoroughly explained well. Matches just randomly happen for no reason because Tony's a video game booker. There's always way too much going on in a 2-hour time span. And if you're already not aware of what goes on week to week. God forbid you miss a show one week or you happen to skip over a segment or two because you're trying to conserve your energy. Good luck trying to figure out what's going on. It's the same garbage I used to skewer Impact over back in the day because they do the exact same thing. Week-to-week booking was atrocious. Segments made no sense. Nothing was ever properly explained. Nobody knew what was going on half the time, including the people in the company. Like, the only difference is that there were only 200 people reacting to it in a crappy studio in Orlando, and it wasn't happening in sold-out arenas across the country. Yeah, there were still about the same amount of people watching back then as they do Dynamite, which should really tell you something about who's actually still watching this product in 2022. But my God, dude. I mean, I could just do an entire podcast ranting about all the shit AEW needs to fix, and they never will, because nobody rational is left in the business to tell them otherwise. Aside from Cornette, but I mean, he wouldn't even piss on AEW if they were on fire, and that's how little investment he has in the hope that these people ever learn from their mistakes. And I can only offer so much advice with what little viewership I already get to begin with. There's still that part of me that really wants this company to succeed, but God almighty, dude. And especially when they put on shows like this, it makes it almost impossible to keep that positivity up. Especially with this opening segment. And, on the subject of this being a bad television program, guess what these numbnuts actually booked? If you answered Orange Cassidy versus Wardlow for the TNT Championship 7 days after Wardlow just won the belt, you'd be correct. Oh, by the way, I totally forgot to mention this from the beginning, but this week was Fyter Fest. Because every AEW show must have a name. Apparently that makes it seem like it's a bigger deal than it really is. It's like when TNA used to title all of their weekly episodes of Impact because Russo kept trying to book it like a fucking sitcom. With Tony, it's, let's make sure we give every Dynamite some kind of special theme because it'll give off the impression that it's more important. Even though anyone with half a brain that's been watching this garbage long enough can go, no, it's just the usual bad Dynamite every single week. They just have a title attached to it. So yeah, Wardlow versus the company mascot in the opener, because they are just destined to kill Wardlow at every turn by affiliating him with every bad act and bad segment as they possibly can. Tony Khan, man. Seriously, this guy masturbates to Orange Cassidy as often as Meltzer does for Kenny Omega and the Beta Bucks. It's seriously unhealthy. Whatever infatuation this guy has with this jagoff, I seriously hope he's seeking counseling. Because I have no other explanation as to why he continues to ram this guy down my throat and up my arse every week. God almighty, you don't have enough time on your show to book Jay Lethal in a match, but there's always room for this slapnut to show up and expose the business every week. Or how about FTR, huh? The hell were those guys doing this week? Aside from sitting and catering. Oh yeah, and they had a match. And if y'all thought that I was actually going to subject myself to watching this crap, you obviously don't know how much I value my time. Wardlow won with the powerbomb, and then he fist bumped Cassidy after the match. And that's really all I needed to see to know that I won't ever need to take Wardlow shit seriously on the show going forward. So great job, Tony. You managed to get me to not care about Wardlow. Didn't take you all that long. What an idiot. So following that, they showed us a pre-tape of Pac defending his newly won Mid-Atlantic, Some-Atlantic, Almost Atlantic belt against that Konosuke Takeshita dude at a Rev Pro event. Yes, Pac's first title defense of an AEW belt, and it takes place on an outlaw indie show in front of 50 people in a darkened arena. Epic. And then we had Chris Jericho out for a promo, and apparently he was super serious Chris Jericho this evening. because, he has to remind us when he's not acting. He has to tell us when he's not pretending to be a wizard and that we're supposed to take him seriously when he's super stern, Jericho. Because, wrestling is fake. And I swear to God, one of the first things that comes out of Jericho's mouth in this promo, almost a direct quote, Eddie Kingston, you challenged me to a barbed wire anywhere match, the first ever barbed wire anywhere match in AEW history. He did? Could have fucking fooled me. And of course, he's running down all of the horrible stuff that the Jericho asshole squad has done to Eddie and his friends, including them having to remind us of the angle from last week where Ruby Riott voluntarily let Ty Conti slam a car door into her arm. And long story short, he talked forever. I paid virtually no attention to any of it because as soon as I heard the words barbed wire, it's like clockwork, man. I immediately disengaged myself. I cannot stress enough how fatigued I am with the garbage shit. Barbed wire, tacks, glass, rubbing alcohol. I'm sick of it. I'm sick of it all. I don't want to see it anymore. And by the way, what is a barbed wire anywhere match? Fuck if I know. It's not like these goofballs ever explained anything to begin with, so why start now, I guess? Yes, on Dynamite next week, for free, yet another garbage outlaw match for no reason. And you can dress it up however you please. I don't care if you call it Barbed Wire Massacre, Barbed Wire Anywhere, Barbed Wire Everywhere. Doesn't make a lick of difference to me. It'll be every garbage match AEW's ever done with weapons, and I'll probably watch 2 minutes of it, get fed up with it almost instantly, and then when y'all are sitting there wondering why this company failed in the next 5 to 10 years, all we'll need to do is show still images of the barbed wire anywhere / everywhere / somewhere match, and it'll speak volumes. Oh, by the way, why are they doing this on free television instead of selling it for the pay-per-view to maybe pop some ticket sales? I don't know, because these people are bad at business. And then we had a follow-up deal with Eddie Kingston in the back, talking up the match with Jericho. And he's got Ortiz and Ruby there with him. Ruby's also got an arm brace on, so if I had to venture a guess, I presume she's kayfabing. But with the injury track this company's been on, if it turns out that Ruby's actually injured, I also wouldn't be all that shocked by it. I mean, nobody knows how to actually work properly in the company anyway, so why would this be a breaking news bulletin to anyone? But the best part of the whole deal, he goes to take off Ortiz's ball cap to reveal his shaved head. Dude's almost got a full head of hair again. It's been like 2 weeks since the hair match with Jericho, and the dude's already grown his hair back. Great angle. So after that, we had the Valvoline attendant versus Konosuke Takeshita. The same Takeshita that they showed us tapping out the pack in a pre-tape like 3 segments earlier. Well, here he is going toe-to-toe with their AEW World Champion and getting near falls on him. Obviously, right? Because there are no actual skill classes in AEW. Everyone's on an even playing field. Especially here in all equity wrestling. What do you want me to say about it? It's a Moxley match. The guy does one style of match. Nonsensical bullshit. Everything about Moxley's offense looks fake. The weak-looking forearms, the chops that barely look like they ever connect, the fake biting he does in every match where you can clearly see he's just covering his own mouth and biting his own hand. Oh yeah, and speaking of the biting, this led to Takeshita gigging during this match. Second match on the show, by the way. Not even like the main event segment of the show, but just a random unannounced match in the middle of a show. Guy bleeds for no reason, because why not? There are not even trying to do anything to sell that it's any kind of athletic fight. Everything's just big move, kick out, big move, kick out. Moxley does a fake forearm, big move, kick out, big move, kick out. Takeshita sells the arm for like 3 seconds and then does a big dive over the top rope. Big move, kick out, big move, kick out. Moxley wins flat with a submission. Same shit every time. Here's a random question though, because I caught Excalibur mentioning this in passing like 3 times during the match. He kept saying this was a tournament eliminator match. It was? What tournament? What are they fighting for? Moxley's already the interim world champion, so what is on the line in this tournament? Was that something they just felt didn't need any kind of explanation? It got less of an explanation than Excalibur telling us that Takeshita apparently wrote his thesis paper on the evolvement of the German suplex. What a fucking clown. I don't know what the hell was going on here. Like I said, Moxley won, and they moved right along with the show like it was just a regular standby match or something like we would see on Mid-South television back in the day. Never mind the fact that it's their top guy having a highly competitive world title match with someone who was actually getting visible near falls on him. Disappointing, man. If only Takeshita could have mastered that German suplex that apparently he spent his graduate work doing research on. Too bad. After this, we had another Luchasaurus squash. This time he made quick work of Griff Garrison. And they basically said the quiet part out loud here. Something I've actually talked about in the past, how Griff Garrison comes off looking too much like a Jungle Boy knockoff. I mean, the kid's a fine athlete, and I have nothing against him. The Varsity Blondes were a team at one point that I thought they could have actually done something with, and they really had something with the group when Pillman Jr. was feuding with MJF last year, and of course that never went anywhere. Much like they virtually do with every other potentially good thing they have at their doorstep. Just nothing ever comes of it. Still need to see if I can get a drop of that famous Moxley quote from the Jericho podcast when he's ranting about how WWE ruins everything they touch. Certainly would apply to AEW in a lot of cases. They are not mutually exclusive. I did like Christian's heel promo on Pillman before the match where he was talking about his dad, but it did get me thinking after it was over. AEW is really big on the gotcha lines where guys take shots at one another to get that burn reaction from the crowd. And I'm not saying I'm against them, but it does feel like they go to the well with it too often. There's a difference between heel promos where guys are taking shots and trying to get the cheap heat reactions and then actually going out and being effective heels to piss people off. You can attain both if you've got the right people to pull it off, and Christian's definitely one of those guys. But a lot of times, it feels like we get too much of the cheap heat stuff instead of the real, authentic heel promos, which I think is why I really enjoy Eddie Kingston's promo work, because even if I'm not necessarily a fan of the way he's booked a lot of the time, I get invested in his promos because it feels authentic. Like, it feels like he's actually trying to tell a story with what he's saying. It's not just a bunch of one-liners. I don't know, I wish more guys would focus on trying to tell a story as a heel instead of, once again, trying to come up with the one-liners, because that's not wrestling. It needs to feel like an actual story-driven conversation instead of a promo battle. That's all I'm saying. But, like I said, Luchasaurus won with a really bad-looking submission hold, which he either needs to stop doing or have someone help him modify it to make it look real. Of course, we had a great failed afterbirth where Luchasaurus went to try and chokeslam Garrison onto Pillman through a table, and of course it didn't break the first time, so Christian had to tell him to do it again. Meanwhile, people are going to give WWE shit for a skateboard botch on NXT with Cora Jade. Christ almighty. I see worse botchamania-worthy moments on the show every single fucking week that make that Cora angle look like nothing. But this is done to set up a tag match with Christian and the Dinosaur against the Varsity Blondes next week, which, well, we'll see. Right now, this whole Christian Luchasaurus dynamic is still up in the air for me. I'm not ready to completely poon it, but there's something missing with this pairing that's yet to get me fully on board with it. And I know things are kind of in a lingering mode right now because Jungle Boy's hurt, and a lot of this feud is going to be driven by the Jungle Boy TV return. So, some of this might feel like it's in autopilot mode right now, but I'll give it time. So this was followed with a couple pre-tapes that I quickly jotted some stuff down about. The first of which was apparently the JAS guys are going to be suspended in a shark cage above the ring during the Jericho-Kingston barbed wire fuckery next week. Why? I don't know. I guess because it wasn't gimmicky enough. Then we had a promo with Tony and the Hangman in tie-dye and a man bun. Looking like a goddamn college frat kid. Y'all still buying this guy was an actual good world champion at one point? I don't know what he said. The job order showed up during it, so I basically tuned it out afterwards. The only thing I really took away from it was, yeah, yes, Tony's actually off of the Hangman Page bandwagon now. Took him long enough, but well, even a blind squirrel finds a nut once in a while. So then we had Jake Hager versus Claudio Castagnoli, which is the first point in the program where there was a match that even remotely caught my eye. And of course, 30 seconds in, the people are already chanting, "We the People," acknowledging the fact that these guys were once a successful act in WWE. It was a perfectly fine match. No real complaints about any of the stuff they did. The guys have been around the business forever now. It's not like they don't know what they're doing. Swagger was never somebody I bought in WWE as a main event guy, but he's at least competent enough as a worker. The guy only has like one facial expression. That's blank, but it was the only match on the entire show where it looked like two grown-ass men having something resembling an actual fight. At least they kept the action in the ring for the most part. Claudio goes over with the Ricola Bomb. Thank God for small favors. They kept the running garbage to a bare minimum. I ain't really saying a whole lot on this show right now, but Claudio's probably the only real highlight they've got going at the moment. With Punk, MJF, and Danielson out, FTR floating in the wings doing fuck all most of the time, Claudio's the closest thing they have to anyone I remotely give a shit about right now. His affiliation with the Blackpool nonsense doesn't do a whole lot for me, but if I just watch his stuff in a bubble and don't think about it too much, the guy still works great. He's still over like wildfire with the people, and until they ruin him with their usual nonsensical booking, I'll keep my eyes peeled on his segments. Then we had some bad WWE level acting skits with the girls that I skipped over entirely. The only thing I gathered out of it was that Thunder Rosa did a job to some girl in a Japanese promotion that I've never heard of. And then Serena Deeb wrestled Anna Jay. I guess Serena's wrestling Mercedes Martinez at the Ring of Honor special as well. That should be good. I'm already going to be checking out that show for the FTR Briscoes match and the Joe Lethal TV title match. And I like Deeb and Martinez, so, that'll give me something else to look forward to. It'll surely be better than this match. God loves Serena, but she's only getting so much out of Anna Jay, let's be honest. Now, if someone rational were booking this program, they'd probably have made sure this thing went like 2 or 3 minutes and have Serena beat her in convincing fashion. But this is AEW, so instead they have to give everybody time. So, of course, all it does is expose the fact that most of their roster shouldn't be doing long matches because, well, they're not really good enough to do it. Anna's rope running in particular is like NXT Week 1 training level bad. She does that thing that almost every green girl does in the business where when she hits the rope, she like flings her arms out at her side like she's trying to take off like a bird. Like, it probably wouldn't be as noticeable if she didn't run like the $1 Million Man, but I see way too many of the girls doing that wing-like posture when they hit the ropes, and it just makes me shake my head. But, actually the other thing I wrote down here, and it's funny because everyone's been cracking jokes about the fact that AEW has way too many goddamn belts, but let's do some breakdown for a minute here and think about it. AEW's been racking up the tag team scene in the women's division lately. You got Thunder Rosa and Toni Storm. You got Nyla Rose and Marina Shafir line now. You got the stuff with Jade Cargill and the Baddies. Athena and Chris Statlander have been working together. Just this week, we had Jamie Hayter and Britt Baker returning together in a backstage skit. AEW is going to try and introduce women's tag belts, aren't they? I can just smell it a mile away. Lord help us all if they actually try and do that. A women's tag division in AEW with a bunch of green girls that can barely work to begin with. That sounds awful. I'm intrigued. And then we had the main event. For the AEW tag belts, it is the Beta Bucks defending against Powerhouse Hobbs and Ricky Starks and Swerve in Our Glory. And cue the weekly I Hate Multi-Person Matches rant. Okay, we got that out of the way. And now we're ready to talk about this clusterfuck. Nick Jackson and Swerve Strickland did some lovely little choreographed ballet dance moves early on. That was very quickly followed up with Nick and Ricky Starks doing simultaneous rope walking spots, while the other two guys were just standing there balancing them on the top rope. Because, professional wrestling is scripted and fake, you see. We have to be as blatant as possible when guys are clearly cooperating with one another. Keep in mind, all of that happened within the first 5 minutes of the match before the commercial break. There was also a horribly botched spot where Keith tried to overhead throw one of the Bucks and Starks, and both guys just kind of took a flip bump without Keith getting both guys over fully. That looked horrible. I would go into my usual tangent about backslap tags and guys just illegally running in and out of the ring at random points, but that would also imply that we don't see that in virtually every tag match. Can we talk about how dead the crowd was for this thing? I mean, the crowd sucked for most of the night, let's be honest, but it was really apparent by the time we got here. At the same time, though, now that I think of it, it's sort of a perfect model of how modern fans react to everything in wrestling anymore. They pop for the finishes and big flashy moves, and that's about it. They don't cheer for baby faces and boo heels in the traditional sense. They don't react when baby faces get hot tags, whenever they do them right in the first place. Everything is, do a flip, impress me. Does anyone know how to work a fucking body part anymore? God, why am I even asking that question? Of course none of these idiots know how to do that. Speaking of the finish, guess we can just talk about that because it was the only real talking point. I could just give you the regular Cliff's Notes rundown and say they did a million kickouts and false finishes until Swerve and Keith won, but there were a few notable things about the last 5 or so minutes of the match. Firstly, they did a completely pointless ref bump with Rick Knox that led to absolutely nothing. I guess the only reason they did it was so that one of the Bucks could throw in one of the belts so they could use it illegally. Because if there's one thing that we've established in AEW tag matches, it's that there are rules in these fucking matches. God forbid we must adhere to the ref's regulations and he might possibly call for a DQ because someone used a belt in a match. Meanwhile, you got 6 guys in the ring at a given time doing fuck all, and Knox is just standing there playing with himself the entire time. So anyway, the ref bump led to them just doing more shit, because Knox was back up on his feet like a minute later, perfectly fine. And that's about the point where all 6 guys just started hitting each other with a bunch of stuff. They did near falls galore, which was the point where the crowd actually got into it. Because once again, that is all that matters in these kinds of matches, thanks to the way modern fans have been educated to react to things. Hobbs got a great reaction given everyone's spine busters onto Keith at one point. So, well, naturally, that wasn't the finish because that wasn't the team that they were trying to put over here, despite the fact that they probably should have. So, finally, Swerve did the little moonsault deal off of Keith's chest to the guys on the outside. Keith then hit a Beal onto Starks, hit everyone in the pile with a senton out to the floor, and then Swerve pinned Starks after a horribly landed double foot stomp where he completely missed Starks, but he sold it anyway. And because these people have no sense of time management, they immediately shot off the pyro once Lee and Swerve won. They spent approximately 15 seconds talking about it, and the show faded to black. So yeah, there's your main event for Dynamite, I guess. I still think the wrong team won, but, if we're trying to pick between the lesser of two evils, between the Bucks holding the belts or Swerve and Lee holding the belts, I'll still take Swerve and Lee. And I'll admit, I definitely did not see the title switch coming. I figured they were building to a winner-take-all match between FTR and the Bucks at some point, but, well, I guess they could still technically do that match if it's going to be for all the other belts that FTR are holding, but it's still weird to think that they still might end up doing that match without the AEW tag belts included. But here's what I'll say. I'll at least credit them in the sense that they finally got a belt on Keith Lee, which is something I've been advocating for since he first showed up. Go back and listen to me talking about it when Keith first came to AEW. I was on board with them fast-tracking the guy to smash over whoever was the TNT champion at the time. It was probably Scorpio, because I've been complaining about how AEW's dropped the ball with a lot of these WWE crossovers. Guys show up, they're hot for about 2 to 3 weeks, and then people sour on them because they're either booked into oblivion or they kind of just stagnate in the mid-card and don't do anything of interest. Keith is one of those guys that's toiled around for a while now with not a whole lot going on, so it's good to see they're actually going to do something with him. It's still bizarre to me how my first thought after this was over was, okay, so when is Keith going to actually turn on Swerve? Because they were teasing that during one of those battle royals they did a few weeks back. Can't remember if it was the one they did on Rampage or the one prior, but it seemed like they were initially going in the direction of having Keith and Swerve split. So now that they've already teased that tension, like the fact that they're the champions now, like now I'm wondering, oh great, so they're going to build to the story of Keith turning on Swerve and costing them the belts at some point. I guess just that's how my hindbrain works after having watched this product for so long. But, we'll see what happens. They could also go in a completely different direction. Still would have preferred seeing Hobbs and Starks win, but whatever. I mean, I'm already sort of giving up hope now that Tony's ever going to actually do anything with those guys, despite that they're actually good. But whatever. And they're setting the stages for something resembling a card for that all-out show in September. I mean, they still got about 5 or 6 weeks to come up with something, but with the shape this roster's in right now, I don't even know what my expectations should be for that card. I have much higher expectations for that Ring of Honor Death Before Dishonor show on the 23rd of July, and most of that entire card has been promoted with 10-second backstage pre-tapes. And it's still more effective than most of the promos and matches they do to hype up their regular programs. I don't know. Maybe I'm just too jaded anymore, but it's like I've been saying for weeks now. Until we get Punk and MJF and Danielson back into the equation, possibly guys like Cole and O'Reilly, depending on how desperate we are for quality wrestling, there's just nothing holding my interest on this show right now. Claudio having a solid TV match with a former WWE reject ain't really cutting the mustard either, if you know what I mean. Like I said at the top of the program, they still got guys like FTR and Jay Lethal hanging around, but for whatever reason, Tony would rather continue to cram down the dreck of the roster every week with Orange Cassidy and Danhausen, the Job Order, and the Best Friends. It's like we're watching 2020 all over again. So, classic content. And we are back in full swing here. We are about a full week into the 86 Bash Tour now. I believe they announced that they were halfway through the big cities and that there were 7 left to visit between now and August the 2nd. It's funny, too, because I was going back and listening to one of Corny's older Experience podcasts where he and Brian Last kind of went into a bit of a deep dive into the 86 Bash Tour and talked about the various cities they visited. Most of the discussion was centered around gate numbers and not so much the actual storylines and payoffs. And Cornette ran down the card for a handful of the events, but it wasn't an in-depth discussion of what went down in each match. Not that I would expect him to remember that anyhow. I mean, he did mention a classic story involving him and Baby Doll, which we will discuss a bit later on because it happened on this particular show. And they really didn't have much of an opening sequence this week. Just a few shots of them blowing off some fireworks while they were playing some canned-in country music. But the good news about being on the Bash Tour right now is that it got us out of the studio for a little bit so we can actually see and hear a full-size crowd. For this particular episode, they filmed this at the Dorton Arena in Raleigh, North Carolina. And I believe Tony announced later on in the program that their next stop was the Bash Tour from Jacksonville, Florida. Now, granted, I believe this was actually taped on July the 6th, so there were several days gap between the airing of this episode and the boys actually traveling down to Jacksonville for the next stop. But, dude, even thinking about the 14 cities they did visit in that month span, like stacking that on top of house shows and tapings for the television shows, times were rough back then. You know, for all those that complain about WWE's brutal road schedule, talk to some of the boys in the 80s and they'll tell you a thing or two about road schedules. But right before we cut to the ring, we had Jim Crockett come out to put over the progress they made on the Bash Tour and that they have an update regarding the newest bald-headed geek, of which they promised to show footage of that later on. Oh, almost forgot, too. Important to mention that Cornette was going to be co-hosting with Schiavone on this program. Guess David Crockett was on assignment again. So our opener was the Warlord versus Gene Ligon. And I have to say this from the jump. I do appreciate Jim Cornette doing Stephen P. New law attorney plugs in the year 1986. Letting us know that they ought to sue for whoever gave the Warlord that horrific haircut. And it was pretty bad, I do admit. The match went all of like a minute and a half before Warlord scooped up Ligon onto his shoulders and won with the running power slam. And then we cut back to Cornette, who brings out Ric Flair for a promo. And they were selling the big world title showdown between Flair and Dusty in Jacksonville that night. It was the first of 2 title defenses, I believe, that Flair had with Dusty on the Bash Tour. Although I don't believe Jacksonville was where Dusty actually beat Flair for the belt. I think that was Greensboro later in the month. But while Flair is plugging the match, he says that Dusty has a lot to think about. Meanwhile, all Flair has to worry about is which one of the 40,000 girls he was going to take back to the Holiday Inn after the show so they could do the deed. So perhaps that was Flair's ultimate downfall when he ended up losing the strap to Dusty for all of like 14 days before winning it back. But he took his eye off the prize. He was too concerned with boinking women instead of defending his world belt. Pity, pity. Then we came back from the break, this time with all members of the Horsemen out for a promo. Ole's talking about how crazy anyone would be to try and go up against all 4 members of the Horsemen, regardless of the numbers game. You had Tully there running down the list of all the guys the Horsemen have not only beaten, but have injured and put out of commission. And you had Arn saying that they still have possession of all the gold in the NWA, and nothing is going to change. And it became very apparent to me as soon as Arn dropped that line about them having possession of all the gold. My eyes directly went to Ole, who was standing there with no gold. Sad face. Next match was Rocky King versus Ivan Koloff. By the way, I did want to point this out. What a cool visual it was seeing the silhouettes of the people gathered outside those giant glass windows in the arena. It was great because they were in an indoor arena, but like with the glass paneling in the background with all those lights reflecting off of it, gave it the vibe that they were actually outdoors, which I think is what they were going for. And of course, watching this match in full context with an arena full of screaming fans, it did become that much more apparent to me how much of a missed opportunity Rocky King was in the business. And I'm not just saying that because of his recent passing, which I still don't think really got enough attention in the wrestling media, but think about the fact that him and Dusty had a good reputation with one another. He had a great body, he could work. Like one of the few job guys they actually had in the studio around this point that could actually work in the ring. I don't know, I always thought Rocky could have worked as an undercard or even a mid-card level babyface. Probably not somebody you want to put the world title on or try to have him go 45-minute Broadway with Ric Flair every week, but definitely someone you could have gone further with if they would have put a little more stock in him. And, especially being able to go in there and work a solid match with Ivan Koloff of all people. I mean, God bless Ivan and all, but he wasn't exactly tearing down any walls at this stage in his career. Correct me if I'm wrong, too, but wasn't Ivan only really active in the business for another several years after this point? I know he ends up leaving Crockett Promotions by late 88, maybe early 89, but he's not around that much longer after this. I love the spot at the end here where Nikita clubs Rocky in the back behind the ref's back, to which Cornette defends this as saying Nikita was merely hitting a fly off of Rocky's back. Of course. Just trying to be a decent human being and help a friend out. This must have been the early seeds planted for the Nikita face turn. So maybe it was long-term storytelling on Dusty's part all along. But Ivan ended up going over with the leg drop after basically cutting off Rocky mid-comeback and beating him flat. At least Ivan gave him some shine while it lasted, though. And here was the point where they showed footage of the fallout to the Shaska Watley-Jimmy Valiant match where Valiant shaved Watley bald. They've been building up to it for Lord knows how long, but we finally got the payoff. Before that, though, we did see the closing minute to the actual match, and my God, dude. You want to talk about guys wrestling underwater? I have no idea how long this match initially went, but these dudes were blown up. It's the most juice I've ever seen Jimmy Valiant get in a long time. There was a spot here at the end where Baron was loading up the black glove to try and clock Valiant in the head with it. When Manny Fernandez ran in to stop him, there's a shot of the two getting tangled up in the ropes. My God, did it look ugly. I don't know if Baron got winded instantly or if he just forgot what they were going to do, but this entire brawl sequence legitimately looked like a street fight at your local retirement home. The only thing missing were the walkers and the canes. But they shot the angle here where Valiant hit Watley with the glove. He got the pin. And then all the faces ran out to restrain Watley while Valiant used the clippers to shave him bald. And the electric clippers actually worked. Go figure. And as I've noted throughout this entire retro review series, everything regarding Handsome Jimmy and the Paul Jones Army, as ridiculous and absurd as the whole storyline was from the onset, you hear the way the people reacted to this finish once Valiant got the pin and they shaved Watley bald. Give me a call when wrestling gets a quarter of the reaction this got. Following that, we had a quick Magnum TA promo where he was putting over his U.S. Heavyweight title Best of 7 series with Nikita. At this point, I believe he was down in the series, so he promised to make a comeback. It's literally all I got out of it. Then we had Ronnie Garvin versus Black Bart, the current Mid-Atlantic Heavyweight Champion. And honestly, I didn't really write a whole lot down about this match. They did a lot of chops and clubbing. They went through a commercial break, and when they came back, Tully and JJ were watching the match at ringside. I did note this fantastic finishing deal, though, because this is everything that is beautiful about old school pro wrestling. So there's a spot in the closing minutes where Black Bart tries to pin Garvin with his feet on the ropes, but the ref thwarts him. And that leads to Bart trying to continue the beatdown on Garvin. And fast forward like a minute later, the finish sees Garvin stack up Bart with his feet on the ropes to steal the pin. A finish that left Tully and JJ outraged. Because how dare this man cheat to win? What kind of soulless prick does something like that in a pro wrestling match? Not Tully Blanchard, that's for sure. Or Black Bart. And of course, by this period, pretty much every single guy had visible scarring and bruising from all the lacerations and blade jobs they were doing throughout the bash. So by the end of this thing, Garvin was bleeding pretty profusely from the head. And by the way, yes, if we're absolutely trying to nitpick, Ronnie Garvin did just pin the Mid-Atlantic Heavyweight Champion here. So I guess we're led to believe this was non-title. And even so, why they beat their Mid-Atlantic Heavyweight Champion on free television in the middle of the show, I couldn't tell you. Maybe because it was Black Bart and no one would care. And that was followed with super stern, super serious Dusty, as he did a promo here with Tony Schiavone. And I did appreciate that his first words here were asking why Cornette continues to leave the premises. Because one of the themes for the evening was that whenever the top babyfaces would come out to do promos, Cornette would mysteriously disappear for one reason or another. So Dusty was kind of breaking the fourth wall here. But he vowed to become the NWA World Heavyweight Champion for a third time. And then he also called out Ole Anderson, saying he's tired of hearing him vow to end Dusty's career in 1986, so he encourages him to jump on it. Interpret that as you wish. My immediate thoughts go to Will and Carlton doing the Jump On It skit from The Fresh Prince. So then we had Tijo Gijo versus Mark Fleming. Booyah! Tijo Khan is back. Where the fuck has this guy been for the better part of 3 months? I miss good old Tijo and his wacky mannerisms on the Superstation. And upon seeing Tijo back in action here, I think I now know why he was off of TV for so long. He was no good. I did appreciate the part during this match where Schiavone was trying to take shots at Tijo's goofy mohawk, and Corny's response is to shame Schiavone for making fun of a man's hairstyle preferences. Despite the fact that 20 minutes prior, Cornette was making fun of the Warlord for his ridiculous hairstyle. Because he's a heel. I think by far my favorite part of this match was the spot where Fleming was actually working over Tijo on the mat at one point, and he begins yelling at the referee Tommy Young to come over and ask him. And it hit me at that very moment that Tommy Young was not paying attention to anything that was going on. Tijo won with something. Didn't even bother writing it down. Terrible match. Luckily, that was made up for with Cornette cutting a heel promo on Baby Doll, promising to rid her of the wrestling business by the end of the Bash tour. And then coming back from commercial, we had Ricky and Robert doing a promo. And aside from running down some of their remaining programs for the Bash, Gibson also informed us that he would be one of Flair's opponents in his series of 14 world title defenses. Morton also name-dropped the Rock and Roll Summer Sizzler again, which then immediately prompted memories of them running down the contest series on television. Bad times all around. And that brought us to Tully Blanchard versus Wahoo McDaniel for the National Heavyweight Championship. God, what a tremendous match this was. And by the way, think about that for a second, ladies and gentlemen. Boy, is this a testament to the skill and ability of Tully Blanchard. The fact that he carried Wahoo to not just a passable title match, but a damn good one. Let me prompt that by saying, because I'm not taking a shot at Wahoo or anything, because in his prime, he was a phenomenal worker, but let's call it as it is. By 1986, he was only really active in the business for another couple of years by this point, and really couldn't do a whole lot physically by this point beyond some chops and clotheslines. But, we constantly talk about one of the big problems in today's business being guys relying too much on moves instead of actually trying to tell a story in the ring or work a body part or play to the crowd in any significant manner. You want to learn about the true art of how to apply all of those aspects to a wrestling match? Go watch Tully Blanchard. I love the finish to this match, even though it was what a lot of us would coin in today's business a fucked finish. So, Wahoo goes to pin Tully, but JJ put his foot on the bottom rope, and he immediately passes Tully the brass knuckles from underneath his sock, and as Tully hits Wahoo over the head with it, he goes for the pin, but Ronnie Garvin runs out, and he holds up the count to alert the official to the knucks. So in one of the best spots on the entire show, where the entire objective was to make the heels look like dumbasses, Tully tries to toss the gimmick to JJ to conceal it from the official, but Tommy Young catches them in the act, and he pulls the brass knucks away from JJ, and he DQs Tully. And of course, because Tully and Ronnie are feuding on the Bash Tour over the National Heavyweight Championship, they had Tully get a little bit of extra heat on Ronnie by laying him out with a slingshot suplex. Crowd still went nuts for it. I mean, the babyface won. And from their perspective, that is all that mattered. By the way, before we move on, I will say this about Wahoo. Even in 1986, with all of the limitations on what he could do physically, still had a hell of a snap suplex. That was followed with the Russians doing a promo with Cornette. And they're covering multiple issues here with all of their feuds they've got going on right now. I believe Ivan had a line in here where he threatened that he and Nikita were going to throw the Road Warriors into the Pacific Ocean. I'd have paid to see that on video. And I also laughed at Nikita's line in here when he's describing what it will look like once he's through with Magnum in his best of 7. He says that many men will have to carry him out of the ring. Not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, but many men, give or take. So then we had Sam Houston versus George South. This is funny because I believe as far back as 2 weeks ago, there was a match on the Superstation where Houston and South were tag partners going up against one of the heel teams. Might have been the Midnights. Meanwhile, 2 weeks later, they are wrestling each other on television, and George South is full-fledged heel. By the way, are we sure George South isn't Dax Harwood when he had hair? The facial resemblance is pretty spot on. It's a fine little match, though. Not sure why it was here, aside from giving everyone a breather from the Wahoo Tully match. Guess we needed a buffer of some sort. Houston won with the Bulldog. But then we had the real highlight of the program. The Midnight Express defending their World Tag Team Championships against the Road Warriors. Hawk and Animal coming out looking like fucking megastars in that entrance gear. I always love the spike vests. And when we talk about the most basic of all basic storytelling in matches, if you gave me a sheet of paper and a pen and said, in one sentence, summarize this match, I think it would be, the Midnights bumped around like crash dummies for the Road Warriors for about 10 straight minutes. And again, going back and talking about the giant crowd for this show, this is the prime example of doing this match in the right environment. If you tried doing this match on a regular studio show in front of 40 people, no way this would have had the same effect. But You fill a venue with 8,000 or so people who are all screaming and passionately behind everything the Road Warriors do. And all they see here are Dennis Condrey and Bobby Eaton flopping and flipping and bumping around for the entirety of the match. It's no wonder the shit got over. Meanwhile, you got Cornette reacting on the outside the entire time, trying to come up with some kind of game plan for his boys while he's watching every single plan fail. I love that one of Cornette's group huddles consisted of him informing Bobby and Dennis that the Road Warriors are big, stupid weightlifters. Yes, that was Corny's advice to have his boys try and outsmart these brick walls. They're stupid. Great tips. One of my favorite spots in this entire match, aside from the post-match angle, which I'll talk about in a sec, there's a spot where Bobby Eaton was essentially acting like a whooping dummy for Hawk and Animal, and it's one of those sequences that couldn't have looked any better if they tried it 50 more times because it was so perfect in execution. What happens is, Eaton dodges a Hawk clothesline by scurrying out of the ring, only to then immediately turn around and get decked by Animal. And I am not bullshitting when I say that within the span of the next 5 seconds, Animal picks up Eaton, press slams him into the ring, Eaton's foot gets tangled up in the camera cable, and while Eaton is trying to unhook the cable from his boot, Hawk immediately decks Eaton back out to the floor with a clothesline while this camera cord is continually wrapping itself around Eaton's body. Like, you want to talk about the perfect visual of making the heels look like total buffoons. And the great thing is that the camera cord incident was unintentional. Couldn't have done it any better if they did it a million times over. I mean, the whole thing was pretty much the exact same match they had at the Crockett Cup earlier in the year. Only difference is I think the Midnights got in at least 2 minutes of steady heat here instead of like 1. And of course, as soon as Animal gets the hot tag, I think the fans broke the Richter scale with their reaction. Ear-piercing at the very least, deafening at its core. But remember earlier on we were talking about Cornette bringing up some stories about working with Baby Doll in the Bash Tour? Well, here was a classic story that not only did I get to hear discussed in great detail, but when I actually saw it play out on camera, it made the story that much more hilarious. Because every detail with the way Cornette described this on his podcast, it is exactly how I envisioned it in my head, played out on camera. So obviously, Cornette and Baby Doll was one of the central built feuds around the 86 Bash Tour, and they were sort of milking the story of Baby Doll eventually getting her hands on Corny. And one of the stories Cornette talked about was the infamous angle where he had essentially gotten blindsided by Baby Doll, and when she punched him, she essentially knocked him loopy. Well, as it turns out, this is the night that he was talking about. What happens is, they do the DQ finish where Cornette runs in with the tennis racket to hit Animal, and while the Midnights are getting dumped out of the ring, Paul Ellering is chasing Cornette around ringside, and they've got the camera perfectly positioned where as they're filming this cat and mouse chase with the managers, we don't actually see Baby Doll in the frame until the final second here. But what happens is, Cornette rounds the corner of the ring post, and while his attention is averted to Ellering, Baby Doll comes up literally from out of nowhere, and when I say she decks Cornette in the back of the head full force, Cornette was not lying when he retold this story. She fucking napalmed this man in the back of the head as hard as humanly possible, totally potatoed him. Like, Cornette drops like a wet sandbag, and the closing moments here are the heels leaving through the walkway while Bubba is basically trying to hold Cornette up the entire time. Once again, hate to beat a dead horse because I feel like every single week on this podcast I have to throw out the same blunt statement. But this, my dear AEW friends, this is professional wrestling. Honest to God pro wrestling that used to sell tickets and put butts in seats. Baby Doll clunking Cornette in the back of the skull and laying him out on the floor. That got 8 times the reaction of anything you see in modern wrestling today. Not just AEW, that includes WWE as well. think about some of the biggest pops WWE's gotten in recent memory, whether it's like a big return or someone winning a major world championship on a pay-per-view, guarantee you compare the reactions side by side here. This show takes the cake. And, maybe in essence, it's not totally a fair comparison because of how much the fan base has changed over the years, but for those of you that really want to understand how great the business used to be, just go watch clips of stuff like this, and you'll understand why disgruntled fans like me yearn for the days when wrestling could ever be this great again. And this was followed with some post-angle promos, both from the faces and the heels. The Road Warriors essentially staked their claim that they stomped a mud hole and walked it dry on the Midnights, so they are the uncrowned tag champions right now. And then Ellering told Baby Doll that she racks a good punch, while Baby Doll vowed she was going to get her full revenge on Cornette by the end of the Bash Tour. No, I think you got your full revenge on this one, Baby Doll. You really laid into him. But, guess as we found out by the end of the show, Baby Doll was the woman with the real hands of stone. So, put that in your pipe and smoke it, Ronnie Garvin. Cornette's follow-up promo was great. He's essentially claiming that Baby Doll had some kind of gimmick in her hand when she took the shot because there's no way a human hand could ever cause that much damage, much less a female hand. He's got the giant ice pack on the back of his head. This is well done. I could go back and watch this 40 times over and it'll never get old. That, ladies and gentlemen, is when you know you've done something right. And then with approximately 4 minutes left of airtime, we get Dusty and the Rock and Roll Express against Ric Flair and the Andersons in a bunkhouse brawl. And by far the highlight of the entire segment, you have 6 dudes going out there and having what was essentially a Falls Count Anywhere, anything goes street fight. So of course, what is Ric Flair wearing? Designer jeans and a dress polo. Don't ever change, Nature Boy. So they proceeded to have, I think the modern term nowadays would be a garbage match that went all of like 3 minutes and change. And the best part is that we never saw an actual finish. They just went to the credits mid-brawl, and quite frankly, if this is what modern garbage hardcore matches were in wrestling, where they get approximately 2 to 3 minutes and they end with no finish, thinking about it now, I'd probably be more okay with seeing them as often as we do. And at least I know if it's going to feature the Outlaw goofs, I won't have to see them on my TV for longer than necessary. And now that I've advocated for more garbage matches on wrestling shows, I immediately would like to rescind that statement. What a great show. Just, one of those episodes of classic wrestling that fly by. Get some great angles, great matches out of it. Best part is that this wasn't even a Bash Tour show. It was just a regular Saturday night event. I might actually go back and watch that Road Warriors midnight match again, just to rewatch the 10 different replays of Cornette getting sucker punched by Baby Doll. What an all-time classic moment. And now that I can confirm that Cornette was not ribbing when he said he got his lights dimmed with that too. There's one female that I would not want to take a punch from. Baby Doll would be high up on that list. And that'll move us right along to World Class Championship Wrestling from July 19th, 1983. Our opener this week was Johnny Mantell versus the recently debuting Rip Rogers, who had a fantastic match with Chavo Guerrero on last week's program. I'll reiterate this again in case you missed last week's review, but if you want a great case of someone who understood the application of comedy in wrestling without being absurdly fake, watch Rip Rogers. That dude got it. We'll talk about the match in a sec, but I believe it was during this match where Mercer referred to Jimmy Garvin as a, and I quote, prancing peacock. I have no idea what the hell that's supposed to mean, but if there's one thing that I don't think I would ever associate Gorgeous Jimmy with, it is a peacock. He's not Dalton Castle. Mercer had another gaffe in the main event, too, with Kevin Von Erich that left me raising an eyebrow or two, but I'll touch on that once we get there. Fine little match, though. Wouldn't say it was as good as the Chavo match from the previous week, but as a cold opener, it worked. I wish I could find more in-depth discussion on Mantell, because the only thing I ever remember about him back in the day is that I would see him doing occasional jobs in places like World Class and Mid-South, but, aside from being the brother of Ken Mantell, I don't really know a whole lot about him. He's a solid worker from everything I've ever seen out of him. I guess you get those benefits when you're the brother of the booker. You're definitely going to get on TV. But he ended up going over Rip here with a cool little Russian leg sweep takeover where he actually just flipped over and covered him that way. Looked pretty sweet. And then we had the greatest interview session of all time. We had Bill Mercer at ringside interviewing Baldy Roberts and Terry Gordy. And when the first thing I see in this segment is Buddy wearing a helmet gimmick with the fake blonde wig strapped underneath, I already knew it was going to be fire. But Buddy talks about the grave miscarriage of justice that occurred at the Star Wars event, where it was clear as the day is long that Buddy pinned the Iceman 1, 2, 3, and he should have been the one to shave him bald, but instead he was blindsided. And it was a miracle that the Iceman only got Buddy's hair removal cream on his eyebrow. Otherwise, it would have been a real tragedy. Because, God forbid something horrible might happen, like the Iceman smearing Buddy's cream on his head. But we get a completely valid explanation from Buddy here as to why he's wearing the wrestling helmet. You see, he suffered a severe head injury, and he's under direct doctor's orders to wear the helmet for the foreseeable future in order to protect him from further brain damage. Seems perfectly rational to me. And then Terry Gordy did a promo where basically he talked in circles for about a minute about how something needs to be done about what happened to Buddy, and if NWA management won't take it into their hands, Terry will. So yeah, that was an all-time classic segment. And it's also a reflection on how seriously the business took concussions back in the day. Geez, who's signing off on allowing poor old Buddy Roberts to wrestle when he's got a head injury? I mean, even with a protective guard and all. Just doesn't seem wise, if you know what I mean. But boy, that Buddy's a trooper. He went out there and wrestled. He teamed with the Mongol to go up against the Iceman, King Parsons, and Bruiser Brody. Man, you want to talk about guys being over. Brody. That guy was hotter than a steam room during this match. These people love them some Bruiser Brody. This ended up being a really good tag match, too. And the obvious story here was the babyfaces trying everything they could to yank off Buddy's headwear, to no avail. But they kept things moving throughout. Lots of quick tags from the heels. And they worked over the Iceman for the heat, which worked in their favor once Bruiser Brody got the big hot tag at the end. An actual hot tag. There's a spot where Brody managed to hit the Mongol with a one-handed body slam, and I think he did the same thing to Terry Gordy in the title match at the Reunion Arena show. And, as impressive as that was, Mongol was much heftier than Gordy. So seeing Brody pick the Mongol up with little effort and body slamming him one-handed, yeah, that dude was strong. By the way, side note here, I have no idea what those "We Want the Wig" chants were about. Those Dallas faithful, man. Crazy bunch. But they had a great finish here with Brody slamming Roberts with a power slam, and then he tagged in the Iceman, who followed it with, as we're well attuned to hearing by now from Mercer, the butt. I seriously need to know who came up with that finishing name, because it is hysterically bad. The move itself I always thought was kind of dumb to begin with, but the fact that they're calling it the butt instead of like the hip attack, It's amazing. And of course, they shot the post-match angle where Parsons went to try and pull off the headgear from Buddy, but he managed to slip out from under the ropes unscathed. Did get a little preview there of the frontal region of Buddy's head. He looked a little receding in the hair department, but doesn't necessarily mean that his entire head was shaved bald, for crying out loud. I mean, good God, you look at the Mongols' wacky hairstyle. These guys were very liberal with their haircuts back in the day. So, maybe Buddy's just waiting to reveal something at some point. I really hope people are smart enough to catch on to frivolity. Lord knows with people's sense of humor these days. Up next, we had a gorgeous Jimmy Garvin promo. And once again, world-class hitting walk-offs with the promo material this week. This one all centered around the follow-up to the Texas Heavyweight title drama with Jimmy Sunshine and David Von Erich. We heard on last week's edition that the next time David and Garvin met for the belt, the loser of the fall would have to be the winner's valet, which essentially equated to something like a lackey or, as Dusty would put it, a personal. And, well, I thought they were going to have another rematch to determine that stipulation, but either they already did the match and we never saw it air, or NWA management took it into their own hands and they've now forced Garvin and Sunshine to act as David's valet. This is phenomenal because the entire time Mercer's talking with Garvin about all these horrific tasks that he's going to be assigned to do, such as cleaning horse stalls and mowing grass, they put the camera on Sunshine, who is beet red and on the verge of vomiting. She is so disgusted with all this. Of course, we also heard that David was going to make Sunshine clean his home and cook his meals. What a dastardly misogynist prick that no good David is. Forcing Sunshine to be a traditional woman. But the deal here is that if Garvin and Sunshine refuse these tasks, they will no longer be permitted to work in the Dallas region. So his hands are tied. It does appear that the vignettes will soon be coming. So that should be high-class entertainment right there. And that took us to our main event of the program. It's Kevin Von Erich versus gorgeous Jimmy Garvin. Side note here before we get into anything else. Sunshine looked very lovely this evening. I approve of her attire. And at this stage, if you really need me to go into great detail about a Kevin Von Erich-Jimmy Garvin match, then you probably haven't been paying that close attention to our world-class reviews. Or you've just never seen a Kevin Von Erich or Jimmy Garvin match. At the very worst, it was great. It is exactly how you would envision a match with these two to look like. Garvin's a phenomenal heel. Kevin is a great babyface. They built the entire match around Kevin out-wrestling Garvin and putting him in lots of head scissor holds, which did prompt me to bring this up, because I talked about the weird statement that Mercer made during this match when talking about Kevin and why he wrestles in bare feet. And this is taken directly from Mercer, and I quote, "His strength comes from his touching." And when I first heard that, I rewound it again just to make sure I heard it right. And when I realized that Mercer actually said that out loud, my immediate thought was, what the fuck is that supposed to mean? His strength comes from touching. And I have to accentuate that little pause because it's important in the context of the quote. Almost as if he was fishing around for a way to end the sentence, but the only word that he could come up in the English language was the word touching. Kinky. Pretty much the entirety of the match could be summed up with Mercer explaining to us the backstory of Kevin wrestling without shoes and talking about why he feels more comfortable barefooted. I believe there was also a part where he explained that Kevin enjoyed scaling tall trees. To which I then asked, is the man Mowgli or Tarzan all of a sudden? Bill Mercer did not have a good night. He was rambling on about all kinds of stuff. I love Bill Mercer, for the record. I always enjoy his commentary, but this was not one of his stronger showcases. But aside from the extended part of the match where Kevin was working over Garvin in various head scissors and stretches, the finish was Kevin giving Garvin the O'Connor roll for the 3, and Mercer kind of sold it as the losing streak continuing for Gorgeous Jimmy. And he did talk here about him losing in his last meeting with David, so I guess there was a phantom title match that they aired as a dark match or something at some point. Kind of wish we'd have gotten to see it. But a great little main event regardless. The deal afterwards where Sunshine tried to confront Kevin in the ring in her high heels. Very ballsy. Probably wouldn't advise that in most cases, but Sunshine trying to get physical with a grown man in high heels is still more believable than most of the female matches I see in today's business. So, take that as you wish. And we closed out with one final Buddy Roberts promo, where Mercer reminded us of the $500 bounty that the Iceman has put out on anyone that can remove the headpiece from Buddy. And, long story short, this was done to set up Buddy versus Bruiser Brody for next week. The promo itself was not particularly good, although we did get to see Buddy legitimately foaming at the mouth, trying to spit out the tale of David and Goliath. It was quite the visual up close. But that should be a fun match for next week's program. Overall, a real solid episode of World Class TV. The Buddy Roberts story was the big highlight, bar none. And you can tell when they do the big reveal down the road, it's going to get a hell of a reaction. And as always, it's nice to see when they kind of take a breather from all the Freebirds Von Erich matchups and try to explore new territory. Right now they got the Von Erichs and some other programs so they can keep that feud fresh. And, that's what you want when you have long-standing rivalries in wrestling. Personally, I don't think there's anything wrong with having guys feud in a 12 to 18-month program, but if it's not on and off and broken up with something else in the middle, you start to have a lot of the WWE booking problems in the modern era where it's the same dudes wrestling each other every single week on television for like 8 straight weeks, and you just get sick of seeing it. So I'm glad they're keeping the Von Erichs and the Freebirds involved in some other issues for the time being. But as we close out today's show, once again, make sure to like and comment to share your feedback on today's episode. Once again, come back and check out the podcast each Monday and Friday for new content and material. We are currently modifying our Monday show to add an extension of the Retro Review series. So on Mondays, we're now going to be covering WWF Raw, going back to 1993, and working our way through the library starting in July. So if you like classic content, you can come back and watch both podcasts and hear some reviews of old school pro wrestling, which everyone loves to hear, especially when you talk about the legendary bad material. And trust me, there will be plenty of it. But until Monday, take care all. Peace.